Britain didn't lose its empire. It just turned the world into its private bank account. You are taught in school that the sun finally set on the British Empire in the middle of the 20th century. You are shown tragic black and white footage of flags being lowered in distant capitals, of colonies declaring independence, of a bankrupt island nation retreating from the global stage after the total devastation of the Second World War. That is the official historical narrative. It is clean. It is comforting. It is easily digestible. And it is an absolute lie. The men who ruled the world from the private clubs of London did not suddenly discover a moral objection to imperial control. They did not surrender their supremacy because of a sudden awakening of global conscience. They simply realized that the mechanics of power had permanently changed. They understood that you no longer needed gunboats, standing armies, or colonial governors to subjugate a nation. You only needed to control their capital. The physical empire of borders and territories was systematically dismantled. But an invisible empire, a purely financial empire, was constructed in its exact place, and it is far more powerful, far more insidious today than the East India Company ever was at the absolute height of its global dominance. To understand the terrifying genius of this second act of the empire, you must look closely at what Britain chose to keep. When the colonial territories demanded independence, Britain let the massive resource-heavy landmasses go. But they quietly, meticulously, and strategically held on to a highly specific chain of tiny, seemingly insignificant islands. The Cayman Islands, Bermuda, the British Virgin Islands, Gibraltar, the Channel Islands. To the average observer, these territories had zero natural resources. They held no strategic military value in the modern nuclear age. They were just rocks in the ocean. So why keep them? Because the brilliant, ruthless architects of the City of London understood that in the upcoming modern era, the ultimate geopolitical weapon was not a dreadnought or a nuclear submarine. It was the tax haven. They initiated the greatest, most successful pivot in geopolitical history. They transformed these scattered imperial outposts into a globally connected, impenetrable spider's web of secrecy jurisdictions. They stopped extracting sugar, gold, and spices, and they began extracting something infinitely more valuable, fluid, and untraceable: global wealth. But a network of secret offshore islands is entirely useless without a central processing engine. You need a mainframe, a place to launder, trade, multiply, and legitimize the hidden capital of the world. That engine was, and remains, the City of London. And to fuel this colossal engine, they needed a currency. They could not use the British pound. It was heavily regulated, strictly monitored, and rapidly depreciating on the global stage. They needed the supreme, undisputed currency of the New World Order. They needed the United States dollar. This brings us to the most audacious financial heist of the 20th century, the explosive, unregulated expansion of the Eurodollar market. The story begins quietly in the 1950s, but to truly grasp its magnitude, you must look at the mechanics of regulatory arbitrage. The United States government, flush with post-war dominance, heavily regulated its domestic banking sector. Wall Street was bound by strict reserve requirements, punishing interest rate caps, and the unyielding, watchful eye of the Federal Reserve. The American bankers felt suffocated by their own government. The Bank of England, watching this frustration from across the Atlantic, saw a multi-trillion-dollar opening. They essentially whispered a proposition to the world's financiers. It was a proposition of absolute, undeniable temptation. Bring your dollars to London. If you deposit your American dollars within our jurisdiction, we will pretend they do not exist. We will not regulate them. We will not tax them. We will treat them as a phantom currency operating entirely outside the laws of any sovereign nation. These ghost dollars became known as Eurodollars. It was the absolute Wild West, a lawless, untethered, hyper-lucrative market operating within the most prestigious, historically grounded financial institutions in London. The global impact was immediate, seismic, and irreversible. Trillions of dollars flooded out of the United States and poured into the city of London. Wall Street banks rushed in a panic to open London branches just to participate in the unregulated, untaxed frenzy. The city of London reinvented itself overnight. It became a giant offshore island moored directly onshore. The British government deliberately, consciously sacrificed its own domestic regulatory control in order to capture the lifeblood of the global economy. By the 1980s, the Eurodollar market was the undisputed beating heart of globalization. It funded the massive expansion of multinational corporations. It fueled the incomprehensible derivatives boom, and it provided an invisible, high-speed pipeline for the world's dark money to flow freely. And it was all orchestrated by the financial descendants of the British Empire. At this point, you might ask a highly logical question. If this system is so inherently dangerous, if it actively subverts the tax laws of allied nations like the United States, if it facilitates the shadow economy, why doesn't the British government simply shut it down? Why does the Parliament in Westminster allow these offshore havens to operate under the protection of the Crown? Because they cannot. The spider's web is the United Kingdom's economic nuclear option. Without the City of London and its vast network of offshore satellites, the UK is merely a mid-sized economy on a rainy island with rapidly declining industrial output. With the spider's web, the UK remains a top-tier global superpower, sitting at the control panel, dictating the terms of international finance. The national interest defense is the unwritten, unspoken doctrine of the British state. Successive prime ministers, from the conservative right to the Labour left, all reach the exact same terrifying conclusion the moment they enter Downing Street and are briefed on the true nature of the British economy. You do not touch the city. You do not touch the web. If a reformist government somehow managed to dismantle the secrecy network, the trillions of dollars parked in the Cayman Islands and the City of London would not suddenly flow into the British Treasury to build schools and hospitals. The capital would simply flee. It would evaporate overnight and reappear instantly in Singapore or Dubai or Geneva. The British economy would face a catastrophic, unrecoverable collapse. The government protects this dark system at all costs, because the system is the only thing keeping the illusion of their imperial grandeur alive. But every empire, whether physical or financial, requires extraction. Wealth does not simply appear out of the ether. It is taken from somewhere, and the primary victims of this invisible empire are not the rival superpowers of America or China. The true bleeding victims are the developing nations of the world. We are constantly fed a narrative of global charity. We are shown televised telethons, massive foreign aid budgets, and philanthropic billionaires, all leading us to believe that the wealthy, benevolent West is constantly subsidizing the poor, developing South. This is perhaps the greatest, most successful psychological manipulation in modern economic history. The reality is the exact brutal inverse. For every one single dollar of foreign aid that flows into a developing nation, roughly $10 flows out in the form of devastating capital flight, aggressive corporate tax evasion, and corrupt wealth extraction. And where does that stolen money go? It flows directly, seamlessly into the spider's web. When a corrupt dictator in Africa loots his country's national treasury, he does not put the money in a local traceable bank. He funnels it through a British Virgin Islands shell company and buys luxury real estate in the heart of London. When a massive multinational mining conglomerate extracts billions in copper or lithium from South America, it uses a complex, impenetrable network of Bermuda and Cayman subsidiaries to ensure it pays virtually zero tax to the country where the resources were actually ripped from the earth. The developing world is not inherently poor. It is aggressively, systematically, and entirely legally looted. The secrecy network designed by the City of London acts as a giant planetary vacuum cleaner hovering over the developing world, sucking up its capital and depositing it cleanly into the heavily guarded accounts of the global elite. This is the dark, silent engine of global inequality. The infrastructure of modern roads, functioning hospitals, and basic schools in emerging economies is never built because the sovereign tax revenue required to build them is resting comfortably in an offshore trust governed by centuries-old English common law. The British Empire used to extract the world's wealth by planting flags, drawing maps, and deploying soldiers. Today, they do it with highly paid accountants, complex legal arbitrage, and nominee directors. It is mathematically cleaner, it requires absolutely no bloodshed, and the victims rarely even understand the mechanisms of how they are being robbed. We desperately want to believe that the global financial system is governed by a core set of moral rules. We want to believe that international law protects the vulnerable, punishes the corrupt, and ensures a baseline of global fairness. But when you finally pull back the heavy curtain, when you look objectively at the cold, hard, unforgiving architecture of the spider's web, you are forced to realize a deeply chilling truth. There is no morality in the movement of capital, there are only interests. The global financial system was not designed to be fair. It was designed to be ruthlessly efficient. It was designed to consolidate and preserve the immense power of an elite class that simply refused to fade into the pages of history. The stringent rules of taxation, the burdens of financial transparency, and the harsh consequences of legal accountability are enforced strictly and violently upon the working and middle classes of the world. But for the true masters of the spider's web, the law is merely a suggestion, a bureaucratic puzzle to be effortlessly solved by professional enablers in bespoke suits. What you are witnessing is the ultimate, perfected expression of Machiavellian power dynamics. It is the profound realization that to conquer and hold the modern world, you do not need to control the land, you only need to control the ledger. Britain did not lose its empire, it sublimated it. It transformed its raw imperial ambition into a series of highly complex financial instruments, ghost shell companies, and impenetrable offshore trusts. It retreated gracefully from the visible world map into the deep shadows of the global economy, where it continues to silently pull the strings of nations. The empire is not gone. It is simply invisible. And as long as the world runs on the US dollar, as long as massive multinational corporations seek to relentlessly avoid taxation, and as long as the global elite need a dark place to hide their extracted wealth, the spider's web will remain perfectly intact. The sun never truly set on the British Empire. It just moved to a different time zone, and it is waiting, silently and efficiently, to process your next transaction.